Well, welcome to you both. Let's go back to that issue that's been burning all week if we can, the return of those asylum seeker boats. 40 men found, of course, in outback WA last week, now in Nauru. James, we know there have been cuts to aerial surveillance. We know the Border Force budget's under pressure. We know also there's a leak in the papers today that the Minister Claire O'Neil says she's going to, thump the table and get a boost to Home Affairs in the May budget. But that'll only make up for what Labor's cut out. Today we find the Prime Minister's got no plans to reopen Christmas Island as a backup. Now, I think this is absolutely crazy not to get Christmas Island out of mothballs and send a really clear signal to the people smugglers, even if Labor doesn't believe it, that they mean business.
Yeah, but I mean, the fact of the matter is what you just said is absolutely correct, Peter. And the problem is they don't believe it. And, in politics, people can tell when you're not being sincere. That goes domestically, and it also goes for people overseas. And people overseas who look at Labor and they say, oh, they abolished TPVs, their attitude is this. Their immigration minister was an advocate for the people who were on the Tampa in 2001. So, they look at this combination of facts, they look at they're not opening Christmas Island, and they know that this is a government, Peter, that is not serious about borders because, in the leftist ideology right now, and these are all hard left types, not, sort of Labor right types, they believe that borders are, somehow icky and not really good and kind of racist. And what right do we have to decide, as John Howard said, who comes here in the circumstances under which they come, which, of course, remember, offended so many people 20 years ago. And now, Peter, we're running back into the same territory again, tragically.
And what says to me, Caroline, that this is a real problem? We've got the Defence Force Chief, Angus Campbell, up in Indonesia right now talking to Defence officials there. So concern in the ranks, this is cutting through. But also new survey data out today that says immigration and border security is an increasing concern for voters, including, critically, and this will impact Labor, younger voters too. So I think Labor knows, at least internally, this is hurting, even if they don't want to have any mention of it in the media, as the Prime Minister tried to avoid again today.
Yeah, they can't ignore the latest research, Peter, which clearly shows that concerns over immigration and border security have really jumped since the last survey was done by the same researchers back in October. And keep in mind that this research was done even before the latest arrival of 40 asylum seekers. So you can only imagine what the concerns will have jumped to since then. People are rightly concerned, given Labor's past record on this issue when there were 1,200 deaths at sea and 50,000 boat arrivals after Kevin Rudd dismantled Howard's boat policy and border security policies. And Labor needs to address those very real concerns that people have.
James, you might have heard me at the top of the show. I said everyone needs to take a Bex and lie down. The job of a Chief of Staff is to light a fire under the office and say we've got to get ready for an election. But no one knows when that election will be called. I mean, the Prime Minister does not know. They haven't made the decision. As my husband, a former national campaigner, used to say, they'll call it or we'll call it when we think we're going to win. Now, Labor's not in that position right now, but some in the media, I tell you that the frenzy today about an election this year was extraordinary.
Well, yeah, of course it was, because, of course, there was that one little bit there in that leaked signal message about an election this year. Now, did they mean this parliamentary year? Did they mean calendar year? Who knows? It's a fascinating question, though, of course, because what you're trying to predict is when will they decide that the stars are just aligning enough? Now, it's fairly obvious to a lot of people. A lot of people are saying, well, the economic picture will start to get a bit rosier after the budget, and, they want to get this locked in quickly so they can get a, better chance at a longer term the second time around. But there's a contrarian view to this, which is that, if the Reserve Bank doesn't, wind up loosening money again, which people are talking about, them not doing now after the wage price data, that there will be some advantage in holding out longer, to this term, and then having a good hard crack sometime early in 2025, whenever we are by then.
All right, we'll see. Let's go to Melbourne City Council and those disgraceful scenes outside Town Hall last night, Caroline, where the councils were debating a motion about a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. Now, of course, it's nothing to do with local government. I don't even think the Australian government's got much of a say, but it's at least within their constitutional responsibilities. It was only defeated by a line ball vote. The acting Lord Mayor, known to us as Nicholas Rees here on Sky News, he put the casting vote to bring down the motion, so it was defeated. Outside, though, hundreds of pro-Palestinian protesters reportedly screaming shame when the decision was announced. Listen to what a Jewish woman told Melbourne Radio 3AW this morning.
And as we tried to go through the crowd to that doorway, some Palestinian supporters with a large Palestinian flag actually moved in order to bar the entrance. And the next thing you know, my husband was pushed to the ground and I got pushed and kicked from the, or punched from the back. And the whole thing kind of became quite an unruly scuffle.
What about Victoria Police? I mean, they were there. Did they do anything?
Yeah, they escorted my husband, myself and the other guy who was attacked out because they had to remove any triggers, i.e. anybody who was identifiably Jewish, and my husband was wearing a kippah.
So yet again, Jewish Australians who are being attacked are the ones that the police move on, not the pro-Palestinian or anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic protesters.
It's disgraceful, Peter, and, you know, I reported on the first instance of this back on October 9, 2 days after terrorists invaded Israel and slaughtered 1,200 Israelis, innocent Israelis in their home, and kidnapped over 200 of them. There were protests on the street of Sydney. There was no retaliation at that point, and it was only a Jewish man who had a still rolled up Israeli flag with him, who was arrested by police outside our own town hall here in Sydney and given a move on order. Not the violent thugs that police believed he was at threat of being physically hurt by, but the Jewish man. And then, of course, we went on to see the disgraceful scenes outside the Opera House later that same night. But in terms of the Melbourne City Council, I don't know why these local councils feel that they need to continue to grandstand on this issue that does not concern them and only provokes more division in the community, as we saw outside the town hall in Melbourne last night. I mean, Israel clearly would not care what some piddly inner city Australian council has to say about its existential war against the most barbaric genocidal terrorists. It's not go, oh, Melbourne Council told us to put down our arms. Okay, we'll do just that. I mean, there's not a lot I agree with Nicholas Rees on these airwaves on, Peter, but this is one issue he was absolutely right to step in and use his casting vote to vote down. And he wisely said that the red flags for him included that this motion did not unequivocally condemn Hamas for its role in this war, and also it tried to draw some sort of false equivalence between these innocent Israeli hostages, which include babies, and Palestinian terrorists who are serving sentences in jails. Councils need to go back to focusing on issues that affect their ratepayers, roads, rates and rubbish, and leave the grandstanding for others.
Yeah, and look, I've got to say all credit to Nick Rees. He's got a backbone on this issue because he would have come under huge pressure internally from the Labor left movement, the Greens movement and others to vote the other way, but he stood firm.